Let's jump into rendering a little bit more deeply this time. In previous videos, we showed that you can take a scene like the one I have here and press the F12 key to generate a very quick render that can then be saved by going to Image, Save As. This is how we've been exporting our 3D scenes for inclusion in our render template and submission and everything else so forth. However, there's multiple methods, or rather I should say multiple engines that can get this process of rendering done for us. Blender includes a few, but there are other third-party rendering engines such as Octane and Redshift that you may see referenced in tutorials online if you continue your 3D studies outside of this class. The two that are included in Blender at the time of this video are the Eevee engine and the Cycles engine. Workbench can be ignored. It's kind of like a work in progress render that helps you render viewports, that sort of thing. So Eevee and Cycles are the ones we'll focus on. If you're not seeing this tab, you can find it in your properties panels under the render properties. It looks like a camera and it's second down from the top. By default, your render engine is going to be set to Eevee. Eevee does a great job of rendering quickly, but it doesn't give you the most pixel precise and most realistic display. I'm going to hit F12 just to see what we're dealing with. So there you have it. We have our sphere and our cube, and actually with our lighting that we prepared previously, it does look pretty good, but it required some configuration to get it to look this way. Meaning, I went into my lights, specifically this light here that's behind my cube, and I had to make some changes to it. I had to mess with the clip start and the bias for this light because previously that shadow was not connecting to my object and was making it look like it was floating. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to grab the default clip and the default bias from my other point light. Turns out that a clip start of 0.5 meters and a bias of 1 is what was used. Right now my bias is 0.001. Let's see what a bias of 1 on this looks like. So 1.0, 1.0, F12 to render. And you can see now that this shadow is kind of making it look like this cube is floating. It's frustrating and unclean and a little sloppy. But that's kind of what you get from Eevee. Let's change that. Bias goes back down to 0.001. Much cleaner, much nicer. Now, why wouldn't Eevee just have these settings out of the box? We can set some of those. However, Eevee is meant to be a very quick, very right out of the box renderer. If you notice, my render didn't even calculate the time it took to render in my image editor here because it was so fast. Hitting the F12 key instantly brings up my render. In fact, I've got it set on my render result here, meaning that it is in real time rendering all of my changes. It's that fast. It's essentially like a game engine where it's calculating all of my changes on the fly for me. So that way, if I change something as simple as a light, it calculates that end result almost instantly for me. In fact, with my setup, CPU and GPU, the results are pretty instant. This is fantastic. So having that Eevee renderer is still very useful. But we can do better. There's another render option, render engine, and it's called Cycles. And Cycles is what's called a ray traced engine. It renders its graphics using light bounces. Now this is a much more time consuming process. In fact, I'm going to make some changes real quick. I'm going to pause this video, make some changes, and come right back. Alright, I'm back. I'm going to hit the F12 key to begin a Cycles render. What we're going to see here now is that render coming to life before our eyes, and it starts grainy because what it's essentially doing is it's bouncing little photons of light out in our scene. They're bouncing back and hitting other parts of our scene, which is why initially this looks very grainy and spotty, is because it's putting little tiny points of light, thousands of them, all over our scene, and it needs to bounce that light as much as it can to fill in all of those grainy areas. So you can see up at the top that there's a time elapsed and some time remaining. It says it's telling me it's going to take about 16 minutes. It really won't. It's using memory and it's rendering my scene and it's doing these samples. So right now I'm on sample 192 of 4096. And once all those samples are cleared, that's all of the little bouncing points of light. This image should look crystal clear. But it does take a while. If you compare the previous Eevee render and its quality, which took milliseconds, to this one, which is probably going to take about 3 or 4 minutes, you can now clearly see the value of using the Eevee renderer for maybe some work in progress, some initial scene setup, and then switching to cycles for your final beauty render shots. The result here is smoother, the light bounce and calculations are more accurate. We don't have those floating shadow problems, and in fact the smoothness of our lights and our shadows and everything else, our materials included, is all superior with the cycles render. It just takes longer. Now there are some things you can do to speed this process up. So for now I'm let me set here, looks like I'm 1:48 into my render. I can stop this render and I can adjust some parameters of the render to make it faster. Now if you have a decent workstation, you can go to Edit, Preferences, and you can go to the System Settings in Blender Preferences, and you can change your cycle render device from None, which hits your CPU, to CUDA or Optics, which will allow you to target your GPU or your graphics card in order to speed up this process. Optics is the most advanced, it's the newest, it's the one you should choose if you have a dedicated GPU on your machine. Go ahead and close this once you've selected it. You can ignore the other two. And then you should see your render engine device change to GPU compute. And then when I hit F12, what was taking about 2 minutes before now is whipping through those samples and is probably going to complete in something closer to 30 seconds versus completing in 3 or 4 minutes. So I'm going to let that complete. There it goes. I know it's done because it says frame 1 and my timer's stopped. And man, doesn't that look good. It's nice, it's smooth. It gets little bounces of light underneath the torus here, and oh, everything just looks great. Now I want to compare this to my Eevee render. So something that the image editor in Blender offers us is various slots to save our renders. They don't save automatically, but if I know I want to compare two values, I can start by rendering first the one I want to start with, and then going to another slot to compare. Now I already have a render in slot 1, so I'm going to go to slot 3. You can see that it's empty. I'm going to close this. I'm going to switch back to Eevee, and I'm going to hit F12. It's instant, and I'm in slot 3. So now I can move back and forth between slot 2 and slot 3. I want to be very clear about the details and differences that I'm seeing. Here is the ray traced renderer using cycles. I can see that my lit areas back here are brighter because of the bounced light. I can see that my shadows are smooth yet crisp where they need to be. I don't have any floating box shadows or anything else because the light is calculated algorithmically and programmatically versus just through shadow maps and other kind of guesswork. So go back to slot 3. This one's a little bit darker, a little less vibrant. And if you notice, even my specular highlight on my torus looks a little bit plasticky, a little bit fake, versus if I go to my cycles render. That now we're smooth, we're getting the matte finish that we might expect. We can get shinier finishes with cycles, but we'd have to rely on the material a little bit more to get that. The form of my cone is actually a lot more attractive in the cycles render versus in this render as well. If you notice, the top of it is very sharp, very flat in Eevee, and it smooths out much more nicely when we're using the cycles render. Now the difference, 20 seconds versus no seconds, is worth noting. But overall, the cycles render is going to be great for your final production shot, and it can be saved in the same way of going to File, Save As. So enjoy these two options, use them collaboratively to get your work done as fast as possible, and then celebrate the beautiful render when you're done.